This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From NotAPipePublishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is historical revisionism.
Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is Nate Crowder. Nate is a writer, a horror hound, jazz fanatic, part-time warlock, and the creator of the Cobalt City universe. Glad to have you here today, Nate. How's it going today?
It's going good. I'm happy to be here, Ben.
Well, we always start off by letting the podcast listeners know about the costumes that we're wearing. Of course, the YouTube viewers can see them. So
Yes.
Tell everybody what you chose to wear today.
Well, this is a full-on classic Canadian tuxedo. The full denim look with the nickel silver bolo, a little bit of turquoise in there.
It's very, very nice. Yes, it just it's outside of my personal comfort zone, but I went all out with you. So I got this denim. I just went with the denim vest over this heavy cotton shirt with the silver snaps. Mm-hmm. And then I got this belt buckle at the Calgary Stampede. So
that's brilliant.
Yes, over my blue jeans, it's a lot. It's a lot of blue for me, but I'm trying. So yes, yeah. we are very much in costume today.
Yes, we are. And I love the buckle. One of these days, I want to go to the Stampede. I've never made it, but I'm from a rodeo family, so
you would love it. It is really fun. Like it is. I'm not a rodeo person, and I totally enjoyed it. It's. You can't really go wrong with that much entertainment with the clowns and the talent and people know what they're doing, and it's great to see greatness at that level. Like it is very cool. So I've been excited to have you on to ask about what has been going on since your last novel, Cobalt City Resistance, in 2018. What have you been working on since then?
Mostly I've been trying to stay sane in very unsane times.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to do a lot of long writing, so I've been, sort of chipping away at short fiction for my Patreon for Cobalt City. But that's sort of evolved into a new cycle of linked novellas that I'm working on. So I'm sort of working my way out of it. And then in between that, things like, taking care of houseplants and baking.
Well, and I've had a couple of Cobalt City folks on, and so tell our listeners what Cobalt City is, because this is really cool thing you've put together.
Cobalt City started as a role-playing game setting, maybe I want to say 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, with myself and a bunch of friends. And as the game broke up and people sort of moved on, there was one more story I wanted to tell that never really worked as a game because it involved everyone sort of splitting off and doing their own thing. So I turned that into a novel. So I basically wrote fanfic of my own role-playing game.
Yes.
For my friends. And they loved it. And they're like, okay, I want to see this. And so I ended up developing that into Cobalt City Blues, which was the first novel in the series. And I've just kept writing, and I've invited other people in to sort of play in the sandbox, create their own characters, play with existing characters. And it's been, I think next year will be 20 years of Cobalt City.
And between yours and all the people who've written in that universe, how many books are there now in the Cobalt City universe? It's quite a few.
If you're counting anthologies, it's well over 30.
Yeah. So this has really developed into quite a fantastic, that and a community, which is always cool. Writers, we need to support one another. So that is cool.
And it's nice riffing on other people's ideas. I really enjoy. There's a character called Stardust who was one of the original Cobalt City characters, and Amanda, who you've had on the show, and Eric Scott DeB, who've had on the show, have both kind of taken him and sort of spun him off in this other direction that I never would have foreseen, and it's been great, and it's been really fun to it's jazz with writing. You get to respond to what other people are doing and put your own spin on things. That's great.
And it's nice to not be too precious with that and let
Right.
folks do what they want to do with that. I mean, I understand that that can also be challenging for artists to go, wait a second, this is my character and you're doing something different with them. But if you're willing, you can see people do really cool things.
Yeah, and for the most part, I think everyone's been very, very respectful of these are certain writers' signature characters that they don't really want a lot of other people messing too much with. So we'll reference them. Like I'll reference Lady Vengeance or Ruby Killingsworth maybe, but I'm not going to do more than like have them drop in for a chapter or something. I don't want to really mess too much with what other people are doing, or worse, do something portray them wrong. So we sort of
Right.
like will share some of these things back and forth. Like if I write a chapter with someone else's character, I'll send it to that writer and say, listen, is this okay? Does this pass the smell test? If not, give me feedback. I'll fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is would this make a canonical change
Yeah.
that would then require you to do something different than what you're doing? If it's, they make an appearance, but they don't actually,
Yeah.
somebody who had not read that other iteration could still, continue with the author's work
Yeah.
with their character. I think you're golden. But
Yeah.
a childhood of reading comic books, getting
Exactly.
to see people be respectful of other people's characters, and, not always. Oh no, what did this writer do with, this other person's character? Because, those writers, they sacrificed kind of the autonomy of the characters they create. And I know
Yeah.
that in the 90s caused a lot of drama. But yeah, it
Yeah.
is, to be handled with care and respect.
And that's the thing. We all respect each other and what we're doing with the characters. And some characters are shared more than others. But yeah, it's like the big two comic publishers.
Hmm.
Uh, Grant Morrison's Batman is going to be different than Denny O'Neil's Batman, and that's
Oh yeah.
fine. And you just come to
Right.
expect that from what you're getting from those individual authors. You find the authors doing the stuff you like, and you follow it. So it's
Yeah.
been fun.
Yeah. So when it's a show about procrastination. When you are not writing, what has been pulling you away in terms of pop culture lately?
Oh man. So a little over a year ago, my partner and I started watching Asian dramas. Like I'd watched this 40, 50 episode series called King's Avatar, which is about esports in China.
Oh wow.
And they'd watch this 40 or 50 epic historical fantasy called The Untamed, which we both had liked individually, but we decided we'd make the other person watch our stuff. And that turned into basically a year of watching almost nothing but Asian dramas. Like this
Yeah.
entire 2023, tons of Korean dramas, some Chinese, a little Thai, some Thai BL stuff, and it's been great. It's a whole other world of storytelling. Their story beats are different. They have more time to expand on stuff, and it's just been fascinating. I've been loving that.
What have you found to be the differences in terms of the story? I mean, because they still follow, you know, I don't want to say traditional Western plot structure, but they're working through their way towards a climax and that kind of thing. How are the beats different that you notice?
I think most of it is they give the stories time to breathe, and they have the freedom to give a conclusion. With American television, with Western television, it's always how long can the series run? We'll do the
Yeah.
series and we'll do like 20 episodes, or lately more like 12 episodes. We'll do a number of episodes and then we'll just keep going season after season.
Right.
With the K dramas in particular, you'll get typically 16, sometimes 12, sometimes 20. Vincenzo was 20. Um, and they have a definitive end.
Yeah.
And you have the episodes are anywhere from an hour to some of them are like an hour and 20 minutes a piece. And you have time to expand on the stuff. So you have 8 episodes, like 8 hours before you even get the first like real committed kiss. And then like another half of the season is them sort of dealing with fallout from that, and they're telling their family and their friends and stuff. So it's the pacing is one thing. They have a ton of tropes, just like all
Right.
good rom-coms have those rom-com tropes. K dramas have their tropes, and so much so we have a bingo card that we check off, and when
Yeah.
someone gets a bingo, we take shots of soju. Um, but it's some of the tropes are very similar to Western things, um, but I don't remember where I was going with this. Uh,
I've noticed some of those in, I'm not a deep manga fan, but
Mhm.
enough to notice, oh, okay, these are, in an anime, like what are the things that, okay, now we're going to have in the middle of a fight scene a flashback for an emotional moment. And that is okay in that, in that kind of cultural milieu in a way that, in American action movie, you would not go, and right in the middle of the action scene, we zoom in on the actor's
Yeah,
eyes and cut away to what is their motivation.
right.
And, and so it's just an interesting way to say there is nothing, inherently superior or inferior about telling the story in this way, but it is different. And noticing those
Yeah.
differences is fun.
And there's certain things you just come to expect, like the 8 different camera shots, slow mo of catching one another as they're starting to fall, and it's like just oh look, slow pans, 8 shots, 8 different angles, very dramatic moment. But you have that kind of time, and it's earned. So when you get to stuff, it's earned, and they have enough time to develop all the other characters. So there's almost always a secondary love story. Sometimes there's a tertiary love story. We just finished What's Wrong with Secretary Kim, which is a couple years old, and there are 4 love stories that you got to see it through to conclusion.
Yeah.
To different levels, but yeah, it's not just this very quick everything set up and resolved within 2 hours sort of thing. And it's not this Sam and Diane moment of like, well, now that they've hooked up, it's gone stale and who cares after like 5 seasons. So it's the pacing is really good and it's really self-contained and everyone's so pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's also not telenovela where, it's we want this to run for eternity. And
Yeah,
so, yes, there's 4, love stories going on, but also one of those is not going to work out. And that's okay because it leads to the next plot. And it's going to, like this is moving towards a conclusion that is
yeah,
preordained. And
yeah.
I do like that. I like I was a big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender because it had an ending.
It
Like
was
it
so good.
clearly had an end, and and an ending that was so satisfying. Um,
And I think that's something we lack in a lot of Western media is that, and I think it's partially because it's these muddied interests of like, well, people like the familiar, they like the franchise. So if it's something's good, we're just going to keep draining it until it's dry, as
exactly.
opposed to having that freedom of we have a set story and this is
Yeah.
the story we want to tell, and it's going to run as many episodes as we want it to run. And I think that's a certain level of creative freedom that leads to better product.
It is interesting because it's creative freedom, but giving yourself limits.
Yeah,
Like, instead of, hey, the freedom to run forever because the network execs recognize that it's making money, it's the
yeah.
freedom to say, no, we're done. Even if it's making money, even if it is a success, you've committed to this, and then it will conclude. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I find that far more satisfying as a viewer too.
And it's something that I think fits for me because I've looked at, I've toyed with the idea of if I had unlimited resources to turn Cobalt City into a television series, how would I do that? And the idea of doing an ongoing, it's never going to end season after season after season is daunting. There's only so many, like, I wouldn't want to do like a comic book of some of these characters that would run for 100 issues. I don't
Right.
know what I would do with 100 issues.
Well, and I
Uh,
think that's where it has to be. I think part of the distinction is within that sense, you've got the kind of auteur. This is going to be this person's vision, and if you
yeah,
want to do the 100 issues of a comic book, or you want to do the TV series that runs forever, it becomes owned by everyone.
yeah,
And there is no because there's no way one person can sustain that,
no.
in a high quality way without it starting to feel tired because they're exhausted.
Yes, yes, that's exhaustion is a very real thing.
Yeah. So, what about hobbies? What's something? Oh no, did I skip here? What's a news story that's been pulling you away from your writing lately?
Oh, you probably heard this one a lot. Politics. I'm a very political creature. I've
Me
been
too. You're in that's you're in good company.
I mean, I've been politicized since I was a kid by, Doonesbury and Bloom
Hmm.
County comic books. I've been comic strips, and by the music I was listening to when I was a teenager, and so I've always been very aware of politics. And the writers are pulling out all the stops for politics this last season.
Yeah.
It's been crazy, and you never know what's going to happen next. And I know I can't affect anything, but I get a certain level of not safety or comfort, certainly, but knowing what's going on and being aware of what's going on, even though I can't fix it, somehow makes me feel a little bit better and worse at the same
Right.
time. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I found that yeah, that for me it's that sense of a big kind of turning point in my political education was 9/11,
Mhm.
because I found that as much as it was shocking and horrific, it
Mhm.
also I felt completely unprepared because there was so much of the geopolitical politics. I knew so
Yeah.
much about American politics and so little about the politics of all these other countries, and it was a real wake-up call that I needed to improve my political education, not because it would mean that nothing would ever surprise me again, but because when the next surprise happened, I would have some grounding in understanding the kind of what are the foundational things that are underpinning a lot of these
Right.
movements of people and the values, so that I wouldn't fall victim to kind of good guy bad guy syndrome, and
Yeah.
recognize that they're far more complex. When we're talking about nations, even within every single nation, there's just as much complexity as any other. And it's
Mhm.
not this nation wants to do this and this nation wants to do that. The people within are dealing with internal pressures and tensions. And learning about that has been helpful. I don't know if it's helpful psychologically. I'm sure my family would say spending all this time reading politics is, also stresses me out and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it is it is a way of dealing with the anxiety of worrying that the other shoe's going to drop and I will not know what's going on.
Yeah. I think everyone wants to have an opinion about stuff, and not everyone goes to the trouble to educate themselves enough about the problem to have an informed opinion about it. I like to would like to think that I have an informed opinion about stuff, but I also believe that I don't know everything. There's a lot of stuff I don't know, and I want to know more. I want to understand more about what's happening and how the world's going. And I also firmly adhere to the idea that um, governments are not their people.
Right.
Um, People are wonderful. Places are wonderful. Like for years, I've been wanting to go to Iran because the architecture and the people and the food. There's so much wonderful stuff in Iran. Do I like their government? No, not really. But I'm not real fond of ours either. So
Yeah.
it's
And there's a tension there because the government is a product of its people to some extent.
to an
Like
extent,
it
yes.
is and so I want a government to be a better reflection of its people. And at the same time, yes, I recognize that the actions of a government are not, the exact same thing as the people. It is mediated through a system that is always flawed, and every government system is imperfect. And so it is not, the people's will cannot be judged purely by the actions of their government.
It, it's certainly influenced by more as a reflection of the people in power
Yeah.
and the people who intend to stay in power. And I've always been a fan of the underdog. I've always been a fan of the people and then the stories of people who are sort of laboring under
Yeah.
a difficult system,
Yeah. Who has been excluded from exerting their will through the government?
excluded
That's a
from the
really
narrative. Yeah,
interesting question. Yeah.
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 And honestly, from a writer's perspective, that makes for better stories too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's this kind of trope that comes back every, I don't know, I mean it never fully goes away, where people are interested in lifestyles of the rich and famous, in the powerful, in the kind of real estate porn. Let's look at the folks who've got the giant houses and the fancy clothes and the kind of celebrity worship. And I think it goes back to let's examine the royals. Like
Yeah.
it's that impulse. But you're right, their stories are really boring. Like, like
Yes.
people living in
Yes.
luxury are not as interesting.
It's not relatable.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's why I think it's boring. I'm like, this is not my life experience in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. Like, I've never,
Yeah.
sat around going, and for my third house, which horses will I buy for the, like that's not, these are not concerns that I share.
Stand-up comedian Kyle Kinane had this observation that it used to be that people like the lifestyles of the rich and famous and these extreme wealth shows, but now the new form of sort of like identification porn is people with jobs.
Yeah.
Like ice road truckers, like they work really hard at something. They get lunch breaks.
Yeah.
It's like they have a stable career. Like that's the new thing. It's like, oh, I'm fixing up my house because my house is falling apart. That's the new sort of aspirational thing. It's not being, I mean, and there are certainly people who still watch the Kardashians and who still watch the Real Housewives who like that sort of drama. But I think a certain part of that is, look, rich people are miserable too. Look how miserable they are.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I think the police procedural was the thing that preceded all of these other, like, hey, we have to, always create the story of the police.
Yeah.
Mythologize the story of the police.
Oh
Part of it
yeah,
was
propaganda has a lot to answer for.
yeah. Yeah. And then finally realizing, hey, we don't have to just tell the story of police at work. We could tell the story of other people who do other jobs that,
Yeah.
maybe are not as problematic and still find
Yeah.
plenty of drama and enrichment in those
Yeah.
other jobs.
Whether it's true life docudrama sort of thing or whether it's fictionalized thing. But yeah, the fascination with, when I was a kid, I was growing up in the 70s watching television. There was a lot of great detective style stuff. So you had like a Rockford Files, and you had Quincy, who, while he worked with the police, sort of, he wasn't a cop. So you had these sort of people solve and a little bit later, Murder She Wrote and Remington Steele and
Right.
Moonlighting. So you had a lot of great detective shows. And then after a while, that kind of gave way to, it's all police shows.
Yeah.
And that's a very different thing, because historically, if you look at the numbers, police don't stop crime and they don't solve crimes.
Oh, and well, one of the things that I live in Independence, a small town outside of Salem, so it's a town of 16,000 people, and my students, I teach at the high school, and my students have this very skewed view of big cities, and part of that comes from the cop drama. If you are regularly watching a show that takes place in New York City, and for the sake of the show, they must have at least 52 murders a year, it creates this impression that, a city like New York City is just full of constant murder.
Yeah.
And I have to say to my students, you realize if we have 2 murders in a given year in our city, we have a higher per capita murder rate than New York City. And my students are just blown away. And I'm like, yeah, some years we have 1 and we're lower, and some years we have 2 and we have a higher per capita. You are not safer here than you are in New York City. It's because nobody sets a fictional show in a small town where in 52 weeks there's 1 murder. Or maybe this season, no murders. It's just not as dramatic. And so it creates this really skewed view that, that big cities are dangerous and small towns are safe, which is not borne out by the data at all.
For several years, the most dangerous place in the world, televisionally speaking, I've invented a new word, was Cabot Cove. like Murder, She Wrote was a small town, and there was always someone getting murdered.
Somebody was getting murdered every week, and that is not reality.
Yeah.
Helping, but I think with, when you get 10 shows that are set in New York, Chicago, LA, it creates the sense that, oh yeah, these are cities just rife with murder. No, most of the people you are seeing dying are fictional characters.
Yeah. You get higher murder rates in moderate sized cities in Tennessee and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, go to small towns with places with really lax gun laws. You're going to get a lot more murder.
And they're not mysteries either. They're like, I shot Jim because he stole the family Bible.
Yeah, and also
which happened in my hometown. There was like one of the murders that happened when I was growing up there was that I remember was like there was a dispute over the family Bible and it led to bloodshed and someone died.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Yeah. There's a lot to that story.
there's layers I don't want to peel back.
Yeah. There's a lot to be plumbed there.
There's a reason I no longer live there. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, what about getting away from the news? Not that there's anything wrong with the news, but I do know that I have a tendency to bring folks.
Oh yeah, I don't want to belabor the news either. If you want to find that, you know where to go. So
right. So, what about hobby wise? What's a hobby that pulls you away from your writing?
I used to be a big role player. I used to have at least 1 game going on a week, sometimes more, and the pandemic that sort of slaked off a little bit, but boy, it's picking up a bit, and I love getting into a good game session. I used to run games all the time, and I'm going to start one again here in the near future. But yeah, role playing's been a steady a steady hobby for me. And
I
then
am jealous. I would love to. I have not found a game, and it's finding the people. It's the scheduling. It's finding the DM, the person
the
who's willing to put
schedule
in
is a
all
tricky
that
part.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have discovered Baldur's Gate 3, which is allowing me to play Dungeons and Dragons without scheduling.
That's a great solution for
It's
it.
been really great.
And they're especially I know it sprang up really heavily in the pandemic, and I don't know if it's still around. I think to some factor it is, where you can find groups that are sort of aggregating on various services, and you pay a small fee for your dungeon master. You've got a game every week, and that's fine. I actually did that as a paid DM briefly when I was
I
between
have a former
jobs.
student who's a paid DM. That's how he makes his living, and he's
Okay,
wonderful at it.
yeah. And so there's ways to go, but I'm very fortunate in that when I moved up to Seattle and I started gaming. Wizards of the Coast created this game center in the university district, and they just had all these big game tables, and they had open games to sign up for. And I ended up falling in with a group of people, some of whom I haven't talked to in years, and several of whom I've been good friends with for over 20 years now. And that's really sort of, I've been able to pull in a bunch of players that I like and a bunch of people I love gaming with, so much so that I couldn't get all of them in one game if I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I can cherry pick, and I'm like, these people would be great for this game. If they're interested, then I'll get this game going with them. And if they're not, then I'll do something with other people. But that's just the fortunate aspect of being in this community. There's so many gamers up here in the Pacific Northwest, and for a while it was easy to find gamers, and from then I just, yeah,
Yeah, once you've got that community built, that is really wonderful to be able to
yeah.
go, okay, and I know this person will enjoy this.
And now that I'm doing it exclusively online, I'm using Roll20, I'm using D&D Beyond. It allows me to get people into games who don't live anywhere near me.
Yeah.
And I was able to play with a friend of mine from college who I haven't seen in person for over 25 years, at the peak of the pandemic. And someone I went to high school with was running the game because he was play testing a system thing he was putting out. And it was great. It was a sort of artificial community, a remote community to be able to play. You don't have to have people in your neighborhood. You don't have to have a table set up in a space. Yeah, it works out. But time is always the problem.
Right.
Finding the time for people to do it is tricky.
Yeah, I mean, folks who have not played, you're looking at an evening, and it is the evening. Like it is, some folks are good at limiting a session to 2 or 3 hours, but still, that's a chunk of time if you do that every week. I've got friends who does it every other, and that's, I think, a real good kind of life balance thing. But even then, 3 hours every couple of weeks, it's a commitment.
The game I got in at the game center when they first opened, I think we had at one point 10 players in it, which was unmanageable. It was better with like big. 6, but 10 was bad, and usually it fluctuated between 6 and 8. We started at noon. We played till 8 with a dinner break in the middle, and it was every Sunday.
Yeah,
and it was every Sunday, 8 hours blocked out.
Yeah,
and we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But I can't even imagine.
I have to step back and say, as much as yes, that is a big commitment of time. There are people who watch 2 football games on a Sunday. It's the same amount of time. Like, so, it is just prioritizing, but it is, it's a commitment, and it's a commitment to other people. If you say, I'm not going to watch those football games, no one is harmed. Right. If you say, I promise to, show up and play this game, and then you're not showing up, there are other people who are affected. So it's a commitment in that way too.
Yeah, it's best to find a time that works for everyone, even if it's only like 3 hours, and you just set that aside on a regular calendar date. The people I used to play with on every other Sunday night, when we stopped playing role-playing games, we play board games now. And we play Board Game Arena, we play Carcassonne every other week, a little bit of Ink and Gold, a little bit of Wonderful World, just hanging out with the same people, just doing something different.
Yeah, and that is wise. Set that time aside so that it's not, So, okay, so role playing. So, as a way to help readers get to know you off the page, if you were yourself a Dungeons and Dragons style character, if you were, in that Wizards of the Coast kind of world, what would be your race and class?
Okay, specifically, if I was in a Dungeons and Dragons world, I'd be a dwarf cleric. Yeah.
And why so? What does that reveal about you?
There's something about the stoicism of dwarfs that's I've always been drawn to. First character ever created when I was, oh God, I think I was 12 years old, 13 years old, was dwarf. And I've always sort of been drawn to that sort of stoicism and that sort of grittiness of dwarf characters. As for clerics, I think they're undervalued. Most people think of them as walking bandages, but they can hold their own in a fight. They can wear the heavy armor. Yeah, they've got spells, but you can use those spells in creative ways that are more than just, oh, I'm going to cast heal on the party now.
Right, right.
So there's a flexibility I think is overlooked in a lot of people, and no one wants to play a cleric. So I can almost always find a slot in someone's game and fit in as a cleric if they need one. So
Yeah, yeah, that's so okay. You're a dwarf cleric,
yes,
and you've been ambushed. So you've been
yes.
ambushed in the woods, 3 level 1 goblins. What do?
Well, given that we're in the woods and there's nowhere for us to go get a drink together, and frankly, you said they ambushed me. They've started it. First one it gets within arm's reach gets smote with a hammer.
And hopefully that will cause the others to go, this isn't wise.
Yeah, hopefully it makes them a little more risk averse.
Yes. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to go to our ad break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about lately.
Okay.
Special announcement time. NotAPipePublishing has always been committed to helping authors and readers find one another. Well, this show, which is all about helping readers get to know writers, just hit a milestone. 10,000 views on YouTube. So to celebrate, instead of charging authors to advertise their books on the show, I'm going to run your ads for free throughout 2024. If you want to make a 30 to 60 second video about your book, let folks know what it's about and where to find it, and don't forget your name and the title. I'll run 1 or 2 of those in our ad spot each week. Just send an MP4 file to the NotAPipe email address in the show notes. Let's fix up some readers and authors into reader relationships. 2024. More readers, more writers, more books. Okay, welcome back, everyone, and welcome back, Nate. So, when you've been daydreaming lately, what have you been daydreaming about?
Oh, that's a complicated one. My life is full of people like myself and my partner who would just love to spend the rest of our lives making weird stuff, like whether it's art or writing or something. But we've got bills to pay. And late stage capitalism is just sort of strangling the creativity out of the world. And I've been daydreaming about that sort of freedom of having some sort of sponsorship, some sort of way to either make a living or be supported just enough that I have that freedom, that we have that freedom, my friends have that freedom to just create, just to make stuff.
Yeah, I have been thinking about that a lot myself, and it is, there's this, tension between, there are ways that I could make money to support my writing, but every one of them that I think of takes so much time that it would, it's like, oh, I would no longer have my day job, which I actually enjoy. I do like being a teacher, so that I could do more writing ostensibly, but really in order to support it, I would have to take on this project that would pay the bills. That means I wouldn't get to do as much writing. And so figuring out how to manage that. I mean, you're right. It's the late stage capitalist structure that is the problem.
Yeah, I see these people who are like, burning their candle at both ends and working heavily to get these jobs that pay them over 100,000 a year and to sustain these lifestyles that, fine. I mean, that's great if that's what makes you happy. That's never made me happy. What makes me happy is having the freedom to create. And I just need a job that will pay me enough to put food on the table, to keep the lights on, and give me time to and not overburden me mentally, so that when I have time, I can write and I can do stuff with it.
Yeah, that was one of the I was talking about with my partner, where, she was pointing out that there are things I could do other than teaching that would be, like, I could do freelance writing, for example. And I was having to explain to her, if I, that absolutely works for some people. I know people who ghostwrite, that kind of thing, and it funds their own writing. It would not work for me because I would be so emotionally exhausted from
Right.
writing somebody else's stuff all day, that then I would not, be able to put that work in, to my own writing in the evenings. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, it is finding what works for you. But yeah,
Yeah.
that
For
that
15
is
years,
now,
I worked as a copywriter. And yes, it was writing, but it was also a very different kind of writing. So I kind of got to keep that stuff sharp. And then when I had my own time, I was able to, this sort of like charged me up in order to make the most of the time I did have to write. And I was super productive as a
yeah,
writer
yeah.
during those times.
I
So,
mean, if it works for some folks, I've got friends who do ghostwriting where,
mhm.
the client comes along and says, I need you to write this business book, or I need you to write, my memoir, my autobiography kind of a
Mhm.
thing. And you have to be willing to say, hey, no matter what the project is, I'm going to do this writing that I, kind of
Yeah.
detest so that I can get to my own work. And, within limits. I mean, I'm sure there are situations where they would turn away clients, but by and large, you're saying, yeah, I'm going to do this thing. And I would find that so draining, And
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
so,
absolutely.
yeah,
And sadly, a lot of those other other like side hustle jobs that you could use to sort of help support you, a lot of those seem to be drying up and going the way of AI.
yeah.
So it's getting harder and harder to find those sort of writing adjacent fringe jobs because people with money decided it was easier to not pay people and just have a computer do it.
Well, and it does make me wonder about in the long term. I expect we will get to a place of a UBI. There are already places that are
Yeah.
experimenting with universal basic income. I think we will have to at some point make an adjustment to, if there are robots and computers that are doing the work, then you have to say, and the companies that are profiting from that work must pay much higher taxes and support the people who are no longer doing those
Right.
jobs, and
Yeah,
that will
that's
free us up to then be able to be creative people. So that's the long term, but that's the hope.
that's the weird corporate bottleneck that I don't think they've ever figured out, that boondoggle they've ever figured out is like if they outsource all the jobs to save money by having robots do it, having computers do it, minimizing how much they're actually able to pay people, then that money's not going to the economy and people aren't going to have the money to buy those goods and services.
Buy their stuff. Yeah, great. You've
Yeah,
got a robot delivery service for Amazon, but you've gotten rid of the people who would then be purchasing the things from
right.
Amazon that the robot needs to deliver to. So
Yeah,
at some point you have to have an economy that sat and the great thing about a UBI, the places where they've practiced with it is there's this kind of conservative myth that that if people are given money, they will cease to work, that you are
yeah,
incentivizing idleness and that they will turn to crime and drugs and blah, 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 blah. And it just is not
yeah,
true. If you give people a basic income, they either continue to work because for our own mental health, we like to be active, but they don't have to do jobs that are miserable. They can
right,
choose what is the thing I actually enjoy. And we find there is a diversity of the things people enjoy. You won't just have everyone saying, I guess I'm going to just pick up a guitar and start a band. Like,
right.
people do a whole lot of different things, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand there's a certain part of how they're going to have problems. They're going to have problems hiring dishwashers because no one wants to wash dishes, and they can't necessarily automate that. And those are lower income level jobs for the most
Right.
part. So if you're able to make a living doing the sort of lower income level jobs and you get the UBI, so you don't have to do those jobs. So much of our society is built around forcing people into doing that labor by holding that carrot over their head.
Right. Which really is,
Um,
I mean, we need to, kind of recognize the morality of holding, it's not the carrot, holding the whip of starvation over
yeah,
their head, holding the whip of houselessness.
yeah,
Like, if that is how we're incentivizing people to do certain jobs, what does it say about those jobs?
yeah, yeah. And it's I don't know. I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah.
I do love the UBI idea. I would love to see it sort of brought in because um, like we call it late stage capitalism for a reason. It's
Yeah.
because it's near on the end of the road. There's only so far we can go before everything breaks.
Yeah, this is not sustainable.
It
And
is
I
not
think that's one of the
sustainable.
things that makes me pay so much attention to politics is there are things that will break down. And when
Mhm.
you study, especially I was teaching my students about the Great Depression, And, the cause of the Great Depression is this hotly debated thing because there is no single cause. There
No.
was a lot of fragility in the system, and a whole lot of bad things happened at once.
Yeah.
And the more you study our current, like it's not global climate change, by itself. It's all these different factors will, potentially break. And if one of them breaks, we can weather it. And
Yeah.
if more than one break, it starts to be, this really problematic system. So I know
Yeah.
that seems like it's a long way from how can we sustain ourselves to make ourselves creative, provide ourselves the space to be creative. But I think the two are related.
The two are related, and you have this misperception of, and a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, they had the economy's great. Look at the all the economic indicators. The economy's great, and they're pointing to the stock market. And the stock market is not the economy.
Right.
The stock market is rich people money.
Yeah.
That does not reflect the fact that stores are like jacking up their prices to take advantage of this perception of inflation to make record profits.
Yeah.
And it's not reflective of any of that stuff. And then you have the venture capitalists whose only model is the arrow has to keep going up,
Right.
buying, investing in failing businesses and squeezing every last penny out of them, investing in places like Patreon and Spotify to sort of squeeze out of every last dime out of creatives.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's not at a certain point. Like I'm on Patreon. I don't know how much longer I'll stay on Patreon at this point.
Right.
I don't know how longer it's going to be sustainable.
I know a lot
So
of folks have gotten off of Substack because
I got off Substack myself, actually.
yeah, yeah, because it's gross. I mean, it's what is willing to be tolerated to make a dime,
Yep.
make an extra few bucks. Because I cannot imagine that the for folks who don't know, what ended up happening is some really overt, out Nazis. Like these were people
Yeah.
who were like, I am, clearly a white supremacist. They then used Substack as a mechanism to spread their white supremacist garbage. And Substack kind of went, okay. And
Their money spends as well as anyone else.
right. And so they were willing to tolerate that being part of the platform. And well, I understand the kind of I have heard the argument of, hey, we need to let these people, make their argument in a free way. I feel like history shows if you give folks the streets, they don't give back the streets. This is the Popper's paradox of tolerance.
Exactly, paradox of tolerance. Or exemplified by the punk bar philosophies in the 80s. Like if you
Yes.
start letting the skinheads in, then it becomes a punk bar. It
Yeah.
becomes a Nazi bar.
Yeah, if you let one Nazi in your bar, it's a Nazi bar now. You
Yeah.
cannot let that. And I mean, it really is true. Like, and I think maybe it'll be interesting to see the extent to which our country is learning that lesson. Like, will it take the demise essentially of the Republican Party to be able to point to it and say, see what happens if you let a Nazi into your bar? If you let a
Yeah.
Nazi into your party becomes a Nazi party. And we have really seen this happen.
And I think there's a certain historical blind spot for a lot of Americans because I love history. I've been a history buff forever. I have a real problem with how history was taught, especially when I was growing
Oh my
up,
gosh,
and how it's
yes.
taught in a lot of other places. And there's even in Germany, we in America we talk about German propaganda during the World War II, and in Germany right now they're talking about American propaganda of
Oh yeah.
selling this American exceptionalism sort of thing, and we forget, like we're not taught that prior to World War II, like in the 30s and even up into the 40s, there were a large number of people in the United States who were not only about
Oh
Hitler,
no.
they're like, no, he knows what he's doing. A
Oh yeah,
plus.
there was a senator who was on the payroll of the Nazi Party. Who
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you heard Rachel Maddow had this great.
She has a great book about that right now. Yeah.
Yes, it's fantastic, and there was so much where I was like, how was I not taught about this in school? Like,
Why were we not shown those pictures of the Nazi rally in Madison Square Gardens
yeah,
that was packed to the rafters?
I was never taught about that. That was
Yeah.
just, there was okay, here's this, leaping around through history, and then, the good guys went and fought the bad guys in Germany.
We just want to highlight the ways in which we're great, and we don't want to talk
Yep.
about our moral failings, of
Yeah.
which there are many.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think the more you start, and the more I study history, the more I understand some of the resistance to allowing people to study real history,
Yeah,
because you go, oh, and the more I study, this foundation is at the rot. I mean, this rot, this is a rot at the very foundation of this country, and it's
mm-hmm.
not just the racism, the stealing
Right.
bodies and land, which that is sufficient. But
Yeah.
lately I've been learning about the kind of history of our commitment to firearms as
Mhm.
the foundational, the one thing we will never legislate against for a
Yeah.
reason. And you start to go, oh yeah, this is our international power. Like, yeah, it's disturbing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And I understand that urge, not to necessarily whitewash history, but to be careful about how you teach some of the bad stuff in history. Because I mean, who wants to go to school and get bummed out,
right.
all the time? But at the same time, you can't fix things if you don't acknowledge the problems.
And I think it's empowering to say to students, you can fix this.
Yeah.
You can make this better. That need not be shaming and
Right.
creating guilt. And, in fact, the opposite, saying, hey, everything is, the American dream creates this society where everybody has equal opportunity. And if you don't take advantage of that completely fair and wonderful meritocratic system, then the failing is all yours. That's actually abusive. That's worse to
Wasn't
kids.
it wasn't it Steinbeck who said that the average American is just a temporarily embarrassed millionaire?
Yeah. And
Or so I'm
I think that's
paraphrasing
part
that
of,
greatly, but
in an effort to not embarrass people, and bump people out in our false telling of our history, we've done the opposite, where we've said you always have to side with the billionaires because that's, if you really believe in the American dream, you're going to be one.
yeah,
And that's yeah, you're right. It's a different kind of propaganda.
that sense of like anyone can be president, and then you see 2016 is like, oh shit, anybody could be president.
Right? Yes, yes. But also not really anyone,
Yeah,
right?
not really
If
anybody.
you are
Someone with a
already a
lot of money.
multimillionaire, it really helps.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, okay. What do you want? I want to make sure that I get to this. What is it that you want readers to know about what's going on in terms of what's coming out from you soon?
oh, what's coming out for me soon? In April, I'm dropping two anthologies are coming out, not anthologies, novellas that are coming out from DEFCON 1 Publishing. It's a series, there's going to be a series of four novellas set in Cobalt City called The Mad World Cycle that are standalone, but also sort of linked to a larger story. I set up the King in Yellow as sort of like this extra dimensional big bad in Carcosa, sort of trying to influence the madness in the city. And it's just time to pay all that off. I set that up decade plus ago. And so now we're finally going to start seeing the end game in action played out in a couple of small vignettes. So yeah.
So this might challenge the conceit of this show that I'm asking a process question, but I am interested. When you're working with something like Cobalt City,
Yeah.
do you find how do you kind of find that balance between saying, hey, reader, this is Cobalt City, you know Cobalt City, or hey, you might be new to this universe, and this is what I need to let you know about this universe so this book could stand alone and make sense.
Yeah, so that's the trick. I know these characters so well.
Right.
The other people I work with know most of these characters really well. And I sometimes fall into that moment while I'm in the process of writing of like, oh, I know what Mad Jack does and what their powers are and what they can do and who they are and where they come from. No one else does
Right.
unless you've read X story
Right.
or X book. So inevitably there has to be a second pass for me to go back through and like, okay, time for me to explain the basics. It's a city in New England that has a lot of superhero. It is the center point for superhero activity in the world. That's where they all go. Here's some of their traditions. They've been heroic since the Revolutionary War. Here's some of the big story beats. Here's some of the big element beats. And here's the individual character you need to know right now.
Yeah.
You don't need to know the whole world. It's like comic books. When I was 12, when I was picking up comic books, I didn't know about the bottle city of Kandor when I picked up an issue of Superman necessarily.
Right.
If I got the pieces I needed when I needed them.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, all of these stories, they're about people. It's not about these huge world-spanning, world-destroying megalomaniacs. All of my stories are about people.
Yeah.
And as long as I'm approaching it from that perspective and giving people the information they need to know about the stuff, and I'll drop tidbits and mentions of other little things, little seeds if they want to go follow down those trails and find the other stuff. That's great. But everything should be self-contained because it's all focused on that one character, and we understand it's a modern world. People understand the modern world. There's enough superhero media out there. They understand the concept of superheroes. It's like not every superhero movie needs to be an origin story anymore. Like if I see Martha Wayne get shot one more time, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Please, do we?
It's like, move on, drop him in situ. It's a guy in tights. Okay, I can work with that.
With clearly needs a lot of therapy and has chosen instead to punch people. Yeah. So one of the things that we do via the show is I always do a weekly poll. Actually, I shouldn't say I always do. When I remember to post it, we do a weekly poll. So what would be your question you'd like to kind of ask the universe for if you had a weekly poll question?
I used to be a little bit of a candy nut. I used to blog about fringe candies, like weird individual localized candies. And since I got diagnosed with diabetes or pre-diabetes, I don't do that as much anymore.
Yeah.
But I am fascinated about this divide: chocolate or caramel.
And this is presuming not both.
Presuming not both.
Yes. Which way? Chocolate?
Because people seem to love chocolate. And just from sheer flavor thing, I mean, I kind of get it. There's good chocolate. There's bad chocolate. Yeah. There's bad politics for chocolate, but I'm not going to go into that.
Right.
But then there's caramel, and it's its own thing. And I'm just curious. I'm more of a caramel person myself. It's not for everyone, but yeah.
That would be an interesting one.
Yeah. Where you come down on that divide.
I will hopefully remember to post that one. That is a good question. If it were one or the other, which would that be revelatory? Would there be a percentage of the readership who'd go, yeah, really, I admit I'm more of a caramel person. Yeah.
What's that? And like chocolate can have caramel in it too. Caramel can have chocolate flavors in it too. But that's key signature, that core element.
Yeah.
What is more important?
The chocolate, the most. Yeah. Okay, I'll run that one up the flagpole. We'll see how that one goes.
I'm curious how that answers. Yeah.
So what is in your to read pile right now? What are you looking forward to checking out?
Well, it's interesting because we kind of touched on this earlier. I've had this book I've been trying to get into for a while, and I just never found the time. And 2024 is the year, and it's called "The Way We Never Were: American Families and the Nostalgia Trap." And it's by Stephanie Coontz. It's nonfiction. I'd say more than half of my reading tends to be nonfiction these days.
Yeah.
And it's a great look at that sort of idealized 1950s of like the nuclear family and all that stuff, and how that's a myth that we tell ourselves.
Right.
That's ignoring a lot of the actual factual stuff that happened in the background, and it ignores like, oh, well, these planned subdivisions and such like this, where we move people out, and dad has a 3 martini lunches and mom's doped to the gills on Valium.
And spousal rape is legal. And
spousal rape is legal.
40,000 black men were being lynched. Like this was not wonderful times for everyone.
And this planned community suburban dreamtopia was sort of, it was a government program to help finance people, but there was redlining. So that was not a dream available for a lot of people. That was a white dream. And so it's this fictional past that people are trying to idolize and lionize and want to go back to never existed.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think how much that myth influences our modern politics.
Right. And
if we could just go back to this thing that never existed, then everything would be fine. That never happened. Yeah. And it wouldn't, and if we went back, you wouldn't like it.
No.
It's really atrocious. Yeah.
There was we couldn't find Indian food
in the show notes, because folks should check that one out.
Oh yeah, it's if you're, I'll admit I have a soft spot, like a little niche for this fascination for history and history revisionism, and this sort of understanding for the spaces we inhabit and how we inhabit and perceive them.
Yeah.
And the past is just, it's full of that. It's
Yeah.
like it's not the Donna Reed show. It was
Yeah.
not the Donna Reed show. It was never the Donna Reed show.
Right.
It's as fake as Main Street USA and Disneyland.
Well, and we know that about our present. Like if somebody were to say, we are all experiencing the world of the Kardashians right now, that is our day-to-day experience. We would go,
Right.
no, it isn't. I recognize that I do not live the life
Right.
of, the Instagram influencer. And yet that was, the product of Madison Avenue of the 50s. We've been taught, oh no, that really is the way life was for
Right.
most people. No, it's not
No,
at
that's a
all.
margarine commercial, son. That's
Right.
not reality.
Yes. No, I'm going to steal that line. I like it. It really is. It was often a margarine commercial.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Selling you something that we'll find out in 20 years will probably kill you.
Yeah. Yes. So where can readers find you when they online when they're looking to check out what you're working on?
Oof. Well, I left Substack obviously because of Nazis, and I'm no longer on Twitter or X for the same reasons.
Yeah.
I am, however, on Blue Sky as Nate Crowder, and Nathan Crowder on Facebook, and as Bebop Diablo on Instagram. And I tend to spend a lot of time on Instagram. I'm one of those people who will show useless, like, here's the sandwich I had. It's raining.
Right.
And it's nothing deep. It's nothing heavy. I enjoy Instagram because it's just this little snapshot of an ordinary life, and I kind of love that. I do have a blog at nathancrowder.com, though it's really neglected right currently. And on Patreon, I've got tons of my short stories up on Cobalt City Short Stories on Patreon.
And
That's a
for
great
folks
place
who
to
don't
be.
know Patreon, it's a way that you can directly support artists. So,
Right.
I encourage you to check out Patreon. There are a handful of Patreon folks where I'm like, at the end of the month going, oh, I'm I'm contributing to all these artists. And it's
Yeah.
actually really cool. It's
Yeah.
a far more, of all of my expenses, they are the ones I am happiest about. So
Yeah.
so check out Nathan's Patreon. That's a good.
I've got some that I support where I don't know. I don't really necessarily care that much if they produce content or not. I'm okay with that. I'm just giving them the money, like
Yeah,
$1 a month, to help support them on their dream, and $1 helps.
right.
And so my structure is, for $1, you get access to all my short fiction, just
Yeah.
PDF downloads. You can read all of the Cobalt City short fiction that I wrote for, and there's at this point several dozen of them. And then there's, for a little bit more, there's other like weird ephemera that I produce and
Yeah.
such. But yeah, it's a nice way to sort of know what's going on in Cobalt City and familiarize yourself with the world. And it's fun stuff.
That's
I only
great.
do like a story a month, if that. So
Yeah, so we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And so
awesome.
folks, make sure you check that out. If that sounds like, hey, it's $1 and you get a whole lot of content, that's a pretty good deal. But it's also just a way to support Nate and kind of celebrate his work. So
Well, and yeah, just familiarize yourself with the whole world that you might actually enjoy playing in. So
yeah. So who would you recommend would be good guests to have on the show?
oof. Well, the first group of people I would suggest are people you've already had on the show, or who I know will be on the show in the near future. So we'll skip those entirely. First person I'd probably think of would be Gemma, probably Gemma Files, in Canada, who wrote the extraordinary novel Experimental Film.
Hmm.
She's written a bunch of other stuff, but Experimental Film, one of my favorite horror novels of the last decade or two.
I've not read that. I'll check that out.
I have this love for forbidden and lost movies, and this is definitely a little horror story that kind of falls down that rabbit hole of film that was not meant to be seen, but it's being seen, and what effect that's having on people. And it's top notch. Also another Canadian writer, also a game writer, is Erin Dembo. She'd be a great guest. She's been doing this for a while and has turned out a bunch of really fun stuff across short stories, poetry, essays, novellas, and a bunch of great game content. She'd be great to have on. Finally, Wendy Wagner, who's down in Portland. She's associated, I want to say it's Nightmare Magazine, but has written some great novels as well, like Deer Kings, which is a great slice of Pacific Northwest Gothic.
Yeah. I
Um,
just finished a book of hers like 2 weeks ago and I loved
yeah,
it. So yeah, I should get her on the show too. She'd be great.
I became friends with her, so I'm internet friends with her on Twitter years ago. I think when certain anthologies were being bandied around, like Rigor Mortis, which was a zombie porn anthology, and Cthulhu Erotica. And I sort of like came into her orbit there, and I met her and finally got to meet her in person at World Horror when it was held down in Portland several years ago. And she's just a fabulous person. She's a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the folks in the Portland scene who know her, I've met her only a couple of times, and just like she just seems like a wonderful person. But I did get to read one of her sci-fi novels, and I thoroughly
Oh, which
enjoyed
one?
it. So the one
With the dogs?
an Oath of Dogs,
Oath of Dogs. Yeah, that's a good
so
one.
good.
Yeah.
I really was very impressed, and so yeah, I am. I'll have to reach out to her and get her on the show. She would be
Oh,
great.
yeah, it should be fun.
But yeah, I'll reach out to those other authors as well. They sound like good picks. So there's some folks I have to thank before we get to our kind of final advice for the listeners. Thanks to artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3Ds. And thanks to Halisna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you're in a band and you'd like your song used on a show, I'd love to highlight a listener's work like Max's song, so email me about that. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making the show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipePublishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com and check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. And if you like this show, rate and review it wherever you found it. Please check out Nate's Mad World Cycle. It's dropping in April. Tell a friend about that. And go to the Patreon, support Nate there as well. It makes a big difference for authors to have that support. So I'm sure that would be greatly appreciated. And similarly, I'm too old to say smash that like button for this show, but if you could gently tap on the little thumbs up there on whatever app you're on or on YouTube, that would be really appreciated.
Or
Um,
smash it if you like.
I mean, if you want to smash it, it's not my, yeah, I don't judge how hard you want to hit your keyboard. That is up to you. But yeah, there's this weird circumstance where there is somebody out there who always downvotes the show. And it throws off the numbers if nobody then counteracts that by upvoting it. So please, click on that thumbs up. I would appreciate it. It seems like an odd thing to downvote to keep coming back
Right?
and downvoting the show. But I mean, people do what they do, and
Mhm.
but if you could make up for what people do, listeners, that would be really appreciated. So okay, so Nate and I have some things we want you to remember just as our as you're moving into your week. Nate, what's your advice for everybody for this week?
Don't be afraid to be adventurous and curious, because you could always find some new media or some new food or some new experience that you didn't know existed before that could be your new next favorite thing.
Yeah. And I'm going to follow up on something that we had talked about kind of our way of understanding politics, but I think it goes with that idea of being curious. I'm going to encourage listeners and viewers, find something you're wrong about this week and admit it.
Yeah.
Admit you're wrong about something. It goes a long way and would go a long way in our politics too, for people to acknowledge error. And then no matter what, no matter how much you procrastinate, remember, we're still proud of you.
If I take my time